All right, well, welcome everyone. My name is Jonathan Aleshire. I'm the Director of Admission at Brandeis University, and I'm really thrilled you're joining us for the beginning of this how-to series tonight focused on extracurriculars. I'll go through kind of a brief overview of extracurriculars and the application, the role that they play, how you can shape that story, that narrative that you were sharing, how admissions officers like myself review and look at these in the context of your overall application. Throughout, please feel free to use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and I will answer those questions as we're going, or certainly at the end, if I don't get to them in the middle, we'll go through and address those. But once again, welcome and really exciting that you're here for this how-to series. So I wanted to begin this presentation by just starting with the basics of the components or the anatomy of an application. So different elements, nothing here likely a surprise. We have transcripts from your high school, academic achievements, school report, most often sent from a college counseling or school counseling office, along with letters of recommendation, extracurricular or activities list, your mid-year report, so kind of senior year progress grades, essays, both the common application and any supplemental essays that you may write. We have a follow-up series on essays coming a little bit later this week, and test scores if you choose to include those with your application. But of course, we are here tonight to talk specifically about extracurricular and the activity list. So I wanted to begin a little bit with the purpose of this section of the application. And really, it helps the admissions office and the admissions counselors understand several different things. One, how you spend your time outside of the classroom. When we're analyzing and reviewing your high school transcript, we see all of the complexities and all of the challenge that you have in your school day. And the extracurricular section is really what we learn what you do once that last class concludes. So where or what fills the remainder of your day. Also, it's a place to express where and see where you have self-directed your passions and your interests, or where you have learned them. It is not only a place to showcase the one true passion you have found. Many of you may have no idea what that passion is right now, but you're exploring and you're trying new things, and that can also reflect as we review the activities list overall. Different areas and different ways you value the time through those commitments that you make with each activity or with each involvement. And then the other thing that we're thinking about is Brandeis and many colleges you're likely looking at are residential communities, right? You're coming here for the academics. You will be in classes, you will have a lot of homework, you'll spend a lot of time in the library studying, but there's so much more to a residential college experience than just the classes. And so we're thinking about what are ways in which you may enrich or contribute to the Brandeis or to the college community to which you are applying. On the common application, there are several different categories you can select. These are not the categories that I have in particular focused on or that Brandeis is focusing on. These are literally all of the options that Common App provides you to select from. So as you enter an extracurricular or an activity on your application, you have to give it one of these headers. Some of these are really specific: athletic, a JV or varsity team, or junior ROTC. Those are relatively narrow in scope. Others are much broader. Research could mean a lot of different things. Academic can mean a lot of different things. And then, of course, at the end, if you feel like your activity or your involvement just doesn't fit into one of these categories, you can use that other category. So, as you are kind of crafting your application, you are likely spending or thinking about spending a lot of times on the essay that you are writing for the common application, the coalition application, or the supplemental essays. But the extracurricular section really is another way to demonstrate your writing, and it's another way to tell your story. So one of those pieces, you select that overall category, right? We've selected athletics, let's say JV varsity, or we've selected other. Next, we have the opportunity to add a description, to talk a little bit more about that. Maybe you're mentioning you're on the soccer team, and then you're describing some positions or some accomplishments that team has had, or maybe you're talking about other, and you're speaking a little bit more to family responsibilities that you have and the responsibility to a younger sibling, perhaps, who needs more help with school or with homework. Those are not intended to be brief essays. Brevity is great in those descriptions for this extracurricular section. Convey what it is that you're doing. If you have a much larger narrative than that format allows, it may be a topic or an interest to consider for a longer essay or for the additional information section of the application, which allows you to elaborate in a bit more of a narrative form. But ultimately, this extracurricular is a list. It is on 1 to 2 pages of the PDF that Common App or Coalition application will send to the colleges. The next thing to do is to think about the order in which you present them. And I have a few examples of that after this particular slide. I would make a list of everything that you have done throughout high school, whether it was for 2 months or 4 years, or you've been doing it for 10 years since you were in the second grade. Make a list of all of those and then start to go through which of those has been the most impactful, or which of those have you perhaps spent the most amount of time with, or is the most notable, and make sure that's your first activity. That's the very first thing an admissions officer will see in this process, is that first activity. And from there, your list can unfold in a few different ways. You can go chronologically. So perhaps by the length of time you were involved in something, you were involved in something 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th. So that's toward the top. And the second one is something you were involved in for 11th and 12th. And maybe the very last one is just something that you did in 9th grade. So kind of shrinking based on the year in high school in which you did it. Or perhaps you're thinking about the commitment, which you enter as hours per week and then weeks per year. So perhaps you have a part-time job in the summer. You're working 10 hours a week for 10 weeks a year. Maybe that's a more middle activity because you have other school year long activities. So things you're maybe doing for 35, 40 weeks a year. Or perhaps that part-time job is year round and you're working 15 to 20 hours a week. And that's a really significant source of your time commitment. Make sure and place that towards the top in that regard. Theater could perhaps be another one. You might think about theater by production that you've been in, or you can cluster that together. And within that description, you can say you've been in 4 musicals and 3 plays with varying levels of roles that you've held in each of those. So whether you break it out one by one, that might change the sequence in which you do it. Or if you pull that category together, that might kind of pull that a little bit further up your list. Be accurate with the length of activity. This is kind of similar to the proofread your essay type advice. Accurate with the length of activity. If you perhaps went on a week-long program to a college, you weren't doing that program 24 hours a day for 1 or 2 weeks, right? You were maybe doing that program 8, 9 hours a day because you were having some meals and you slept some and you walked around the campus some. So make sure you really think about what time was I committed to this particular activity, not just, okay, I was gone for a week or I was gone for 3 weeks, and this is the amount of hours that wrap up into 3 weeks overall. So really seeing that accurate commitment is helpful. We are not on the back end doing calculations. Okay, this student volunteered with this organization for 21.2 hours this year and 18.9 hours last year. We're looking at those broad trends and themes, which you're helping to present with the accurate descriptions of the hours that you have done. And then lastly, I already kind of hinted at this one, but proofreading is important. Have a friend read through it. Ask a family member or a parent, did I forget anything? You are likely really involved across a variety of things. And over your 4 years of high school, that changes and things come and go in the midst of maybe some steadier opportunities. And perhaps you just completely forgot to list one. So soliciting that advice from family members and then thinking, is that one I want to include? And if so, where does it fall on that particular list? But with those brief descriptions that you're applying to every single extracurricular, write those out, pause, come back a day or two later, and reread them. Do they make sense to an admissions officer who has never heard of this club or has never heard of this commitment? Do they make sense to my friend that knows exactly what I did? They've been in the program with me, and it does accurately reflect what we're doing. And getting those two sources of inputs on your statement, I think will help make sure you are representing that particular interest or that particular piece as well as you can to a college admissions office. So I wanted to pull up an example. This is a fictitious student. This is no one's actual or real activities list. But just to highlight a little bit of, in some ways, how this gets conveyed to an admissions office. And I like to think about this as two columns when we're reading, right? So on the left-hand column, we see just in the red font, art, cultural, debate, speech, family responsibility, art. We see the years, so that first one in 10th, 11th, and 12th, they spent 5 hours per week, about 50 weeks per year in that particular art category. So to this student, I am inferring and I am interpreting by those numbers that that is one of their most significant activities and contributions of time. I come down to number two, cultural. It's something they just did in the 11th grade for 3 hours a week for 45 weeks a year. So they did it the entirety of 11th grade and a little bit into the summer, likely on either end as a youth ambassador at the Atlanta History Center. But what I'm starting to think as an admissions officer is, okay, we had one activity that spanned all 4 years. And we're already down to now the second activity is just a single year. So perhaps the things are really kind of trailing off in terms of where that depth of commitment has been across high school. But if I can draw your attention to two things further down the list, debate and speech and family responsibility, the two with arrows pointing there, both of those are multiple years in high school. Both of those are fairly comparable to art in terms of time commitment. But this particular student has put them lower in that list. And so that sends a few messages. One, it's either an activity that you're not placing as much emphasis on, or it's one that you maybe just forgot about and added late, but decided not to go in and reorder or adjust where that particular activity fell. And with family responsibility, this is something a lot of students spend significant amount of time on. An extracurricular doesn't just mean it's sanctioned by an organization, your high school, a religious community, a community center where you may live. An extracurricular is a way you are filling time, and commitments and responsibilities that you have to your family are absolutely meaningful and important ways you are doing that. In this case, this particular student cooks dinner for their parent and themselves, as well as some other chores around the house. That's important. That's a significant level of time commitment. It's a significant level of maturity, just like the others are demonstrating. So make sure you are valuing those things that maybe aren't formally structured like a sport or like a school club in the same way that you would a part-time job or being involved in the theater or doing research over the summer or all of those other different categories that I showed a few slides ago. I have seen a lot of questions coming in, so I want to pivot over to those quickly. Please continue to ask questions as we're going. This was really meant to be this interactive back and forth. I know I can't see you, but I can see your names and questions here on screen. So great question. Does studying something specific outside of the classroom, is that an activity? So maybe you self-studied some physics or you self-studied a language or something like that. That's absolutely worthy of putting on your application if it's something that was a significant interest and significant time. So maybe if it was just a little bit after homework or when you needed the break between subjects, you watched a YouTube video here or there, I don't know that I would necessarily say that's the top half of your activity list, but perhaps you're self-studying one of those subjects because it really fascinates you and you're hoping to use that language in your community. Or you took a physics class, you really love the subject, but you're maxed out on the curriculum at school. And so you've been self-studying some other concepts and maybe trying some kind of experiments on your own. That absolutely is an activity of growth and exploration, and worthy of being shared. Would it be better to write that I came second place at a national competition or qualified for an international competition? Both. Those are both amazing accomplishments. One is not necessarily greater than the other. I understand as tournaments go, right? They regionals to states to national to international. There's a progression there, but accomplishing something at any of those levels is important and is relevant. And so I think that would be wonderful. Winning second place at national is huge. Moving on to an international competition is also huge. So I would share both of those pieces. Assuming that's within the same activity, I might start with what is the most recent first. So perhaps you begin with the international competition, comma, or international competition is taking place January 2025. You don't know how you'll place, but you place second in the national competition this past July, right? So you can kind of go chronologically within the activity as it builds up through those different levels. Um, can you write about an activity in our college essay and also include it in our activities section? Absolutely. If you are referencing an activity in your essay or anywhere else on your application, make sure you're also putting it in that activity section. It helps the thread across your application remain constant. It's unlikely in your essay you're going to say, I do this for 10 hours a week for 32 weeks a year, right? That information comes from that extracurricular activities section. The essay, you're giving a larger narrative around it. So we get slightly different pieces of that information. Sometimes we learn about involvement you have that you're really passionate about from a letter of recommendation or from a school counselor. Don't just let them share that story. That should also be included in that particular activities list. Is it okay for me to include activities that I may not have participated in for all 4 years of high school? Could that have a negative impact on my application? Absolutely. You should include things that took place during high school that may not have been all 4 years. You might have had a really meaningful experience on a JV athletic team in ninth and 10th grade, and then perhaps you had an injury that pulled you out of that sport. Or maybe it wasn't until junior year that you really discovered your love of musicals. And so you have 2 years of maybe the chorus that was a part of that, or 2 years of symphony. That's still important. You were exploring, you were finding. So whether you started it later in high school or you ended it early, there's still ways you were thinking, you were sharing and learning about your passions throughout that high school time frame, and definitely worthy of being shared. Now, an activity that maybe you only did in ninth grade and didn't continue, assuming you have some other involvements, I wouldn't put that one first on your list, but I still absolutely think it should be on your list. That would not have a negative impact to see that transition as you've moved from different pieces of involvement across your 4 years of high school. Does it reflect badly or poorly if extracurriculars are not following the same theme? Absolutely not. Some students are very focused. Their activities might be playing an instrument, and they're in the orchestra at school. They're in an outside music group. Perhaps they also play that instrument in a religious community that they're a part of, right? So every activity maybe ties back to music. Or maybe you've just explored across the board and you worked for a year at the local ice cream shop. You worked for another year as a host at the local restaurant. You did 2 years of baseball, a couple years in yearbook or in a social justice organization. That exploration also shows your depth. One of those is not better than the other. Those are both really valuable tracks and ways of finding interests and exploring the opportunities around you in high school. And we will have both types of students on a college campus, right? We will have a student that comes to major in music and they're very involved in music at Brandeis or at whichever college. And that kind of more narrow track continues for them. And we'll have students that come and at that org fair at the beginning of the semester will sign up for 20 clubs they've never even heard of or knew existed on a college campus, and they get really involved in some of them. And then sophomore year, they come back, and their best friend who did the same thing their first year pulls them into a few new clubs. And so you join some new clubs or groups or organizations in that sophomore year. So both happen in high school and should be expressed, and both are ways of experiencing college opportunities as well. Does traveling overseas with family count as an activity? And the question also kind of narrowed that to say specifically with ancient or historic sites, but just to keep it broad. I would say that typically maybe a family vacation, I wouldn't necessarily fold into the activities list. Perhaps if you were doing a specific lesson or study while you were on that particular vacation, you uh, went to a particular country for 2 weeks and you went to a language school for an hour or two every day while you were there, in addition to exploring and going to historic sites and visiting museums. That's certainly worthy of sharing. So you can list a family vacation, but I wouldn't generally think of that as an extracurricular or as an activity to name in your application. All right. Um, see, several questions we've addressed. So just reading down the list, a lot of questions here. So thank you. I appreciate the participation. Um, would it be required to include a recommendation from a place where we did volunteering or where we had our part-time job or wherever that thing may be outside of the scope of the high school? It is not required. It is certainly an option. Brandeis and most colleges will give you an opportunity for what's called the other category of recommendation, and that is meant for an employer or a local nonprofit or volunteer organization that you work with. If you think that will contribute a different side to who you are, that can be really valuable, and certainly invite whomever your kind of closest supervisor is in that organization or in that company to write a letter of recommendation on your behalf. If you don't have that level of closeness, it's okay. You don't need to send in a letter of recommendation to support outside activities, but if you think that really sheds a light and the individual is willing, certainly you are welcome to do that. Should I order my activities based on length of commitment or the importance factor? And this is a little bit where it can go either way. And so I would say, sort of the formal answer I would give is either. And let me explain. We've talked a little bit about this, but to structure it specifically to this question, sometimes the length of commitment is helpful if all of the things feel relatively similar to you. The thing you've been most involved in is what you're most passionate about. The thing you stopped doing after junior year is what you were a lot passionate about last year, but maybe not as much this year. And down the line, then that chronological perhaps makes sense. But maybe it's something you got involved in 11th grade and have a really significant time commitment to this year. So it's only been 2 years. So it's a newer activity or extracurricular, but that's been a big time commitment. It's a big area of passion. It may be appropriate to put that one first to highlight that over perhaps maybe an organization you've been a member of for 4 years, but it's really just going to 1 or 2 meetings a month for an hour or two out of that month. So the one that's maybe the larger time commitment that's really significant to you, despite being less years, perhaps should be towards the top in that particular situation. Is it bad if my activities don't reflect my desired major? Absolutely not. We do not expect that you have identified in your ninth grade or 10th grade, 11th grade, or 12th grade exactly what your major is going to be in time to identify an activity that perfectly aligns and parallels what that major is. Some of you may. you got involved in your student newspaper and you're really interested in studying journalism. And so there's a link there. But others of you may be interested in studying journalism, but you have never done a formal activity or involvement that relates to that, and that's fine. We're very rarely pulling those activities directly to what you indicate you think you would like to major in and study to see if there's a correlation there. Because just like your major, you may come to Brandeis and completely change your major and find a new path. You may have been really committed to a particular area of extracurricular, and you come to college and you find a completely new path. So no, it does not have to correlate to your intended major. How do you write about clubs and activities where you didn't necessarily have a leadership role, but participated in things like fundraising or community outreach? Um, Exactly sort of like that question is phrased, but minus the part where you say I didn't have a leadership role. But saying, as a member of this organization, I helped with fundraising efforts. Collectively, our club or our group raised X amount of dollars for X cause, or to purchase X supplies for the school, or something like that. So you can share that your involvement was in the context of the group. You don't need to say I was the head of fundraising if that's not true, but you can still talk about and participating with the fundraising, or participating and going kind of door to door to local businesses to see if they would contribute an item for what you may be collecting for something. Is it important to have those extra explanations in the extracurricular section? I do think it is important to include that. Sometimes we can skip over them relatively quickly because we may understand what that is, but more often than not, even if it's something you think is really standard, the way you have participated and been involved may be really different from the same activity that another student from another high school participated or was involved. And so that description helps us know a little bit more about what it was that you perhaps did with that group. So, for example, maybe you are in the National Honor Society and you have a leadership role there, or the National Honor Society at your high school is really active and plans a lot of volunteer events that you participate in. Or maybe someone is a member of National Honor Society and that was something they were nominated into and they don't really do a lot with. That's going to be a very different description than someone who's really active and engaged. So even though the names are the same, and that's kind of a national recognition that high schools can award, the involvement and what you're doing with those varies. And so those descriptions help us understand that a little bit more. If I did research with a mentor, but only for 1 year, would that still be a strong extracurricular to include? Absolutely. Um, uh, Uh, Next, I had this idea from my friend that at least 3 to 5 of my activities should be related to my intended major. How true is that? As the director of admissions at Brandeis, that's not what we're looking for. Certainly some students that will be true for, but that is not some mysterious checkbox that we are marking when we review an application. We're curious what fills your day, what fills your weeks, how are you meaningfully spending that time? Because that means we know when you come to Brandeis, you will meaningfully fill the time at Brandeis. So again, no, it does not have to tie to your major, though for many students it may tie to their major. Okay, I see there are probably, I think, 60 to 70 more questions. We're right at time. I hope that some of these I have already answered and what I have covered. Just in terms of next step, I'd like to offer a few things as we conclude here. First, I think one of the most important pieces to having a strong application overall is starting that application early so that you give yourself the benefit of time. You can finish that activities list, let it sit for a few days, and come back to it and read it with fresh eyes. Or you can finish it and, like I recommended, pass it to a family member and say, did I forget anything? Pass it to a friend who's been with you for those and say, does this description make sense? Am I really reflecting what I've done in this particular organization? Or just thinking, is this really the scope of everything that I'm doing for my family? Or perhaps is it even more than I'm thinking of? And two is that if the format of the common application or the coalition application is just too constricting, some students will upload an optional resume. That is not expected, that is not required, that doesn't give any student a boost in the admissions office. But if you feel that the format just really isn't letting you convey everything, a resume can be a way to send additional information to colleges. I would still complete the extracurricular section, even with an attached resume. If we come to a page that's just entirely blank, that kind of sends a, well, that's a very interesting, decision. This is the student truly involved in absolutely nothing, and then it's further on in the review that we might come across that resume. So give us the teaser and the extracurriculars, and then we'll see the additional detail in a resume if you choose to include one of those. Again, entirely optional and only if you feel like the extracurricular section just isn't quite meeting what you would like to convey to a college. I hope you all have found this helpful. We have more how-tos, including the how-to and tips around essay writing, coming up. You can register for that in the exact same website where you found the registration for this. Thank you for joining me. I wish you all the best in your college applications. Reach out to our office by phone, by email, admissions@brandeis.edu with questions. We are always happy to answer and to continue this dialogue as you make that decision of where to apply. Is it early decision? Is it regular decision? Which of those deadlines is right for you? Or perhaps you're just struggling with, is it activity one or activity two that I should list first? And I'd appreciate a little feedback. So please feel free to reach out to us with those questions. Thank you all so much and have a wonderful rest of your day.